All right, so I wanted to do a video for section 13.1 called Time Value of Money. In this section, we're primarily going to be looking at the idea of interest and comparing simple versus compound interest. All right, so if you borrow an amount of money today, you're going to have to repay that, but you're also going to have to pay a little extra for the privilege of borrowing that money or using that money. That increased amount, that extra little bit you have to pay, that's interest. Okay. So the word interest can apply to extra money you owe because you had borrowed some money, or it can also apply to the interest that you earn when you deposit money in a bank account. All right, the amount that you borrow or the amount that you deposit is called the principal. The interest is calculated as a percent of the principal, and that is called the interest rate, or just the rate. And we assume that it's going to be an annual rate unless they tell us otherwise. So a certain percentage per year unless they tell us otherwise. All right, now, interest can be calculated only on the amount you originally deposited, the principal. When that's the case, that's called simple interest. But if the interest is calculated on the principal plus interest that you might have earned previously, that's called compound interest. Okay. All right, so first I'm going to be focusing on simple interest. Here's how you calculate the simple interest. You just take the principal times the rate times the time. Okay? Principal times rate times the time. There are some tricky things that you have to understand, though. One of the things is that the interest rate needs to be written as a decimal. So 7%, 7 per 100, 7 divided by 100 would be the same as 0.07, because you'll always want to put the decimal form of that into the formula. Then also, if you're given a time and it's in months, you're going to have to convert that to years, because the interest rate is assumed to be per year. So you need the time in years. So if it's 6 months, that would be half a year. You could do 0.5 or 1/2. Okay. So then we're just going to answer these two questions. First, we're going to find the simple interest. So we're going to do that by using that PRT formula. In place of the principal, we're putting that $4,800 that we're borrowing. We'll multiply that by the 0.07 and multiply that by the 1/2 or 0.5, and we get $168. All right, now there's another piece to this, though. They also want to know what would we, if we were the borrower, what would we have to repay? Okay, so we would need to repay that $4,800 we initially borrowed, but we'd also have to pay that extra $168, that interest, and we'd have to pay that as well. So we'd have to pay them a total of $4,968. Okay. So this right here, the 168, that is the simple interest we would owe. And then that 4,968 is what we would need to repay. Okay. All right, so the total amount that you repaid, that's the maturity value of the loan. Okay. It's going to be referred to as the future value or future amount, and that amount, that's where the A comes from in the formula that we're about to do. All right, that original principal, which is the amount you borrow or the amount that you initially deposit, can be thought of as present value, what you're depositing today or borrowing today. Future value is what you're going to have to pay back in the future, or how much you're going to have in your bank account in the future. Okay. All right, so We've already calculated what the future value of a loan would be, because that's actually what this is right here. Oops, didn't mean to move that. This right here is actually the future value. We just didn't know that language yet. It's the amount that you would have to repay. So when we calculated it there, to calculate it there, we just took the original principal, the amount we borrowed, and we added to that the interest. And we had calculated that interest by using the PRT formula. Okay. So this new formula that you see really is doing the same thing, because think if that P were distributed to both, wouldn't we have P plus PRT, which is basically what we did earlier to get the total amount we would need to repay. Okay. All right, so here we're going to be working with simple interest. Really, I wish they would do a better job, or that I would do a better job of clarifying that we're dealing with simple interest. It's sometimes clear from the context or from what they give you in the problem. So, but this is an annual simple interest rate of 12%. All right, so here they want us to find the future value. So if that 460 were a loan, then what we're trying to find is the amount we would have to repay. That's what the future value would really give you. Okay, so I'm thinking about the A equals P times 1 plus RT. Place of the P, I could put the 460. Place of R, I'd have to be thinking about how, in that context, how the R equals the 12%, but I'd want to change that into 0.12. For the time was 8 months. This one's a little harder to think about, but 8 months is really going to be 8 divided by 12, or 2/3 of a year, isn't it? So in place of the R, I'm going to put the annual interest rate of 12%. So T needs to be years, and it's 2/3 of a year. All right, now you really should not round off when you're doing this. So you could enter what you see right there, okay? And then round off at the end. So type it in, you can type it in just like that. Okay, so I'm taking the 460, left parenthesis, 1 plus 0.12 times 2 divided by 3. And I get $496.80. Okay, so that would be it, $496.80. Okay. All right, now I could do this. So could do just the interest, right? So I could take the 460 times the 0.12 times the 2/3, and I could get that $36.80. Then I could come back and say, so the total amount I'd have to repay, okay, or the total amount, the future value would be that principal plus that $36.80, and I'd come up with the same answer, $496.80. Okay. All right, so you can approach it however you'd like. Sometimes how I approach it depends upon the questions that they ask. If they had asked me for just the interest on question number 2, then I probably would have done this so that I could get just the interest. But on this one, they didn't want just the interest, they wanted the future value. So your actual answer is the $496.80. So you wouldn't stop with the $36.80. You'd go on and get the $496.80. Okay. All right, now let's also do one more thing. All right, this question is also going to be a simple interest question. If you can earn 6%, let me add in that simple so it's clear. 6% simple interest, what lump sum would you need to deposit now so that its value will turn out to be $3,500 after 2 years. All right, the tricky thing here is that you're being given the future value. $3,500 is what you're going to wind up having in the future. So A is actually the $3,500. Okay, now the T is 2. The R is 0.06. Okay, so it's a little harder to calculate, especially if you haven't had an algebra class recently, but I know you can handle it. So you know this formula, A equals P times 1 plus RT that we used before. We're looking for P. P is what we're trying to find. So we're going to plug in the 3,500, but it goes for A. We don't know P. The interest rate is 6%, so we'll change that to 0.06. The time is already years, so we'll put in a 2 there. Okay. All right, so for this one, what I need to do is understand how to get P. So there's an understood multiplication between the P and everything else. Okay. So that 1 plus 0.06 times 2, I really need to divide by that. 1 plus 0.06 times 2, okay, on both sides. This can be difficult to enter, okay. So what I really have at that point is that my P, I'm going to raise it up over here. So my P would equal whatever 3,500 divided by 1 plus 0.06 times 2 is. Okay? You don't want to round off, okay? But you might want to take a moment to calculate that denominator. You might even want to calculate it before you divide by it. See that, in fact, I think that would seem much simpler. So let me back up here. Okay, I'm okay doing what I just said to do, and sometimes things don't turn out to be as nice as this one. Okay, but let me show you what I think you'd have more success doing. Still putting the 3,500 in for A, and putting in the 0.06 for the R and the 2 for T. But then I could work out that 1 plus 0.06 times 2, and I would get 1.12 with the P equaling that 3,500. Okay, then what I could do is divide by that 1.2 on both sides, 1.12 on both sides, and that would get the P by itself. And when I do that 3,500 divided by 1.12, that looks messy. Let me change that so that's 1.12. I wind up with 3,125. Okay. All right, now on this one, so the answer to the question is $3,125, but you need to be careful. So I'm going to make a little note here. You should not round. Until the end, if necessary. Okay, so sometimes when you're typing that in, that 1 plus 0.06 times 2, sometimes that's not just a 2, that's some other fractional amount. So sometimes it's better to actually type it in like this. Okay, and let me fix that so it looks like what it's supposed to be. That's the 3,500. And when you type that in, you'll want to have parentheses around that. So sometimes I type it in that way because that 1 plus 0.06 times 2, that doesn't always turn out to be so nice. And you don't want to round off there and then introduce round off error early in the problem.